Hi there! How can you predict the next move of Lucid stock? To have something like this, the stock price will go from $2 to $3, an increase of over 50% in just a few months, and of course even higher. How can you predict the next move of Lucid stock? Well, you look at their deliveries and the number of production. How much they delivered and how much they produced. And more recently, they reported the numbers for Q1 2025. You can see here. This is just a short overview of the next results for Q1, but you can see that for this period, Q1 2025, they produced 2,200 vehicles, plus 600 additional vehicles in transit to Saudi Arabia, and the company delivered 3,100 vehicles during the same period. So, you compare these numbers with the past quarter, Q1 2024, right? And you see that in Q1 2024, they produced 1,700 vehicles and delivered 1,900 vehicles. And compare those two numbers, four numbers, number of deliveries and number of produced vehicles, and you can see an increase in their vehicles. From deliveries, from 1,900 to 3,000, and for production, 1,700 to over 2,200. So, as they are about to report the results for Q1, the stock price may go up because you see that increase in the number of deliveries and number of production. Now, another question is how much can the stock price go up? Because maybe you'll have a 10% increase and then flat. Now, you also have to pay attention to this. You have to ask yourself what's their cost. You see here, Q1 2025, they produced 2,200 vehicles. So they have a cost to produce those vehicles, right? Plus 600 additional vehicles. About 2,800, right? And in 2024, Q1 2024, they produced 1,700. This means that also their costs have increased, right? And you compare the growth rate between the number of vehicles produced and the number of vehicle delivers. And if you do the math, you can see that the difference is about 1,000 for each. Vehicles delivered and vehicles produced. So, the revenue will increase for sure, Q1 2025, but also their costs. This means that you might see an increase in the stock price. Don't expect huge upsides. But you may see an increase, a small increase, when they report the results for the first quarter, Q1 2025. Now, you have to go further to see in the future. How can you do that? You also have to look at the previous quarter, Q4 2024, where they produce 3,300 vehicles and delivered 3,000 vehicles. And again, compare those two numbers with first quarter Q1 2025. And you see a reduction in the number of vehicles produced from 3,300 to 2,000, and just a small increase in the number of deliveries from 3,000 to 3,109. What does it mean? It means that the revenue may be about the same as the fourth quarter, but their costs may be lower. So let's check how much they make in the previous quarter. Let's check it. Here, you can see 3 months ended December 31. This means Q4 2024. Revenue was about 244 million. And their losses, 742 million. So the revenue may increase a little for the next quarter, Q1 2025, and their costs may get lower, less than 742 million. And in order to see that compared to 2023, their costs got a little bit lower. And if that happens, they increase their revenue a little and their losses gets lower, you can see an increase in the stock price. And of course, you have to ask how much. How much can it increase? That's why you have to dig deeper. And let's see. Plus, I want to add something important. They want to acquire some facilities and assets from Nikola, which went bankrupt, by the way, and also to extend offers to 300 former Nikola employees. What does it mean for Lucid, this piece of news? Well, if they buy assets from a bankrupt company, this means that they'll pay less. This means their costs will get lower, right? If they buy from a bankrupt company, because they want to sell their assets and pay their liabilities, right? And they'll sell it at a lower price. And this is a good deal. Plus, they may also get some professional employees, engineers. And if they are good ones, this is a plus for Lucid in the long term. So you can see this piece of news as a long-term benefit for Lucid. Then, to predict the future of this company, Lucid, what their stock price will do, you have to ask the question, what is the demand? Especially for 2025, right? Because if you want to invest right now, and you might want an increase like this, again, another 20%, as they release the next quarter results. So, what is the demand for 2025? As North America, especially United States and Canada, are their most important market, you have to look there. And you can see that EV sales in February 2025 were up 20% from February 2024. Of course, flat to January this year. But as you can see from previous year, their sales were up 20% for this market. So it seems that for 2025, the demand is still there. Plus, they also have, the buyers, consumers, have a benefit, a federal tax of about $7,000, and they maintain their market share, according to S&P Global Mobility. However, some companies, for instance Tesla, is a wild card, as the research says, which predicts a dip in their sales or decline of 20% because of competitive pricing pressure from rivals like Ford and GM. Now, Lucid is more on this luxury side. If you look at their cars, you can see here. It looks quite nice. And their cars are more for the luxury industry. But still, you have to look at the demand for EVs because that's the most important. And then, for Canada, the sales grew steadily. But there is a problem. Trump administration hints at potential rollbacks of EV incentives. To cut this benefit federal tax credit of $7,500. And if that happens, that will be a drawback for all EV companies, especially in North America and especially in the United States. If that happens, for sure, the stock price will decline, a little or more. So you also have to be aware of this. But still, even if the Trump administration cuts that incentive, EV incentive, still, according to S&P Global Mobility, they predict an increase of 16% in EV sales in 2025. So from 2024 to 2025, they predict a 16% increase in the EV sales. So, based on these reports, you can also assume that Lucid will be able to continue to grow by 16% or even more. If you look at their past numbers, past revenue, you can see a higher growth rate than 16%. And this may continue in the future and the stock price may go up. You also look at their guidance for the last quarter, Q4, and you see here, production guidance. They expect to double the number of vehicles produced from 10,000 2024 to 20,000 vehicles. And that's quite a lot. if they double the number of vehicles produced and also the number of deliveries, their growth rate, the growth rate for Lucid will be quite high for this year 2025. Now, what can affect their growth rate to be lower than 16% or lower than the previous growth rate? What can affect their growth rate? You also have to ask the question, what can affect their growth rate? Because if their growth rate is affected, the stock price won't go up. You won't have an increase of 50% in just a few months. So what can affect their growth rate? Well, when you look at this image, you already know the answer. The trade war between the US and China. China says it will never lower tariffs unless the US cancels its old tariffs on Chinese imports. Now, how can this trade war affect Lucid? Because if you read the reports, they already said that their vehicles contain thousands of parts and materials from suppliers around the globe. Right? And they also said that a trade war between the United States, Canada, Mexico, China, and the EU could impede the transition to electric vehicles, disrupt global supply chains, and delay the implementation of their policies. And this is already happening. Right now, they announced about this trade war, about this risk, and now you have it. So their future growth rate can be quite affected because of this trade war. Now, my prediction and what I think about those tariffs is that in the long term, they will make a deal, for sure. For sure, they will make peace. Because they have no choice. If they continue, not only Lucid or other companies, but the entire industry, the entire economy will be affected. And they don't want that. When they will see the bad effects, they will immediately rush to make a deal. But in the long term, of course, the market will be bloody. However, during that period when they start to announce the tariffs, the stock price had declined by, let me show you here, April 1st, just only 9% and then a rebound, 9%. And as they report a higher growth rate than expected, the stock price can continue to grow. But still, you have to predict the demand, see what can affect that demand. So demand is there is no doubt. See what can affect their demand. This can happen in the short term. And in the long term, for sure, they will find a solution. Now, if you put a gun to my head and ask me what price would I pay for this stock, Lucid stock, then this answer is available for members. If you want to know it, you can join my membership. Go to my profile, press join, and then scroll down to choose the level you want. By the way, do this from an Android or laptop to avoid extra fees from Apple. And if you want to know more, better investments than Lucid, you can join my Titan membership, where you have access to my portfolio and an investing course from zero to expert. So that's it. And if you have other questions, please let me know in the comments.